Okay, everybody, welcome back. So today we have a handful of stuff to do. I'm going to give you some more lecture stuff today. So I'm going to give you some lecture stuff on Android storage, files, and databases. We'll do a Android database tutorial. And then after that, we're going to look at SMS messaging. I got some SMS messaging lecture material. Then we'll do an SMS lecturing tutorial. And then I have a couple things on events and, well, I have a whole agenda of stuff. So we'll see how far we get through it. If we don't finish today, we'll do it next week. So, all right, so Android storage. And there's value to some of these PowerPoints, which is why I'm bringing up some of them. Because you don't have a book, you don't have any reading material to do. However, there's a lot of tutorials that I have not covered, or lectures I should say, that I have not covered yet, but I've covered them in the tutorial. I've talked through them. So if you want some extra reading, go ahead and go through some of those PowerPoints and PDF files that I sort of skipped to date. But we are about halfway through the list, or getting close to it, which makes sense because we're at the halfway point. Also, another student told me that 2 of the links from the localization and the Notepad tutorial are not working. I have supplemental links for you. So I'm going to edit those 2 assignments this evening. I had to make sure the links were okay. The links work out just fine. I've emailed a couple people the links already. If you're missing the links and you want to work on it now, send me an email message. I can give you the links. Otherwise, I'm going to edit the assignments to put the new links in it. The links that were in there, the server's no longer there. Happens all the time. It's Android material that's reproducible. So another company's got it, so I just put it out there. It used to be on the Android developer website, but it's not there anymore. Or if it is there, I haven't found it yet. So rather than looking for it, I'll just give you some more links that work instead. So no fear, you can still do the assignments. I know a lot of you are afraid you couldn't do the assignment. You can still do the assignment. So I still have work for you to do. So there are several different options regarding storage and data with the Android. So you can put data in what's called preferences files. You can put data in a normal file, normal text file. I have a tutorial on preferences as well I'm going to give you. Maybe not today, we're not sure yet. We can also send data across the network to a server, upload it to a server, or we can use a database. A database is probably the most popular way since, believe it or not, it's like one of the easiest ways of doing it. And it's more reliable and you can use database tools to work with it. So just like the iPhone that has a preferences kind of concept, so does Android. The preferences files are a lightweight option. When I say lightweight, I mean if you're storing 1 or 2 items of information, preferences work well. Just like the word sounds, preferences. It's like if you have app preferences where you're going to save the person's name or email address or something, or it's just maybe a handful of items, works well. In terms of speed and efficiency for navigation, for support, not so good. I would not write a database application and stick it in a preference file. Too slow. Uses sequential access. So if you're going to sequentially go through the entire list of preferences to find a piece of data, you've got thousands of those things, too much, too slow. So you can put data inside of these preferences files if you're storing a very small amount. And to call context.getSharedPreferences. What we're looking at is context, which is the phone. It's the environment that we're working with in terms of the Android system. The preferences are shared, so which means we can actually use the preferences on multiple different screens, different activities within our application. So we read and write values as key value pairs, kind of like a dictionary, like name and then bhacker or something, or email address and then some value stored to it. So you use an activity for your activity, and this is a class activity. Get preferences, well, this is a class method on the class school. We're inheriting our objects from activity with no name to keep the name private in the calling activity. And there are not shareable across applications, only within the application, unless you expose them to the content provider. You can keep preferences in a content provider if you create a new content provider for it, and then you can share it across different applications. So the shareable is among different activities that reside within the same application. As we've seen, hopefully you're getting the concept by now. Those different activities that we've been using intents to transfer back and forth between, those are kind of the That's the multi-threading that we get. Well, only one thread runs at a time. One thread contains one activity. But within inside of the application environment, all of the activities can all share the same preferences, the same database, and the same files. Nothing outside. In fact, that concept is true for all three, databases, files, and preferences, only within inside of the app, not outside. So it's not like a database you get like in the real world where you connect multiple applications to the same database. No. So you can write larger data to files. So preferences, used for small data. Files, used for medium-sized data. Database, used for large data. So that's how it's scaled. So if you have a lot more data, you can use a file. You can only access files available to the application. And you put them in the resource raw directory. And this is the name of the file, my data. So mydata.txt or whatever you want to call it. So you either write to or read from a pre-included file under here. You can also put in the raw directory other types of files, media files, text files, binary files, anything that you want to give access to the application to use goes into raw. And it's raw because it's not filtered through the other resources. It's meant to be used outside of the Android environment. So you would read a file, write a file, kind of like regular file I/O you get in Java actually. So you can read data from a file, call the context open file input, pass it to the local name and the path of the file. It returns a standard Java file input stream object. So if you're familiar with Java, it's the same methods that you're using to do file I/O with regular old Java. Assuming that you're not, we'll see that in upcoming example. I don't have one that does preferences or one that does files on their own. I have another advanced one further down the road that has both of them incorporated. I do have a separate database one that we will look at next. So to write to a file, you're going to call the context open file output. So, because these tutorials would be kind of simple, too small. If you're just going to open a file, read to it, open a file, write to it. It's like one line of code, 2 lines of code. Doesn't really make itself for a complete application. So we place data anywhere else we want to on the network. We can call it in and out, so we could use a web service to store database elsewhere. We have the Google Cloud service through Google Market. It's a separate API that you're going to use for that if you do that technique. Otherwise, you don't have to use that. You could just go out and use the FTP, send a file somewhere, receive a file from somewhere, or communicate with a web server. So it makes it automatic for all users. Twitter apps, photo capture, all sorts of different things you can do with that. So in fact, the last term I had a guy write a program that takes pictures and then sends it up to a, I think he called this thing Friends or something. I can't remember if you put it on Android or iPhone. It's the same concept, really. He took pictures with the device, and then from the content provider, I think it was Android, from the content provider, you take the pictures from the stored film that was taken from the snapshots, and he uploaded them to a server. So it's about 4 or 5 lines of code. Not that fancy. But pretty sophisticated when you go to the server and look at it and go, oh, look, that's from my phone. And it all happens automatically when you take the picture using the app. And the app is just basically using an intent to get the content provider, which is the camera. Take a camera, it loads up the component to take a picture, gives you all the GUI for the camera, you just press the button, and then when you're done, it goes back, just like the address book. When you're done taking the picture, it goes back to the app. And so it's every time you want to use it, calls a content provider. So you can also use persistent data to a database. So this is what we're going to focus on today, actually. So we have built-in SQL Lite Database. So it's private to the application, and principally you can expose the data if you want to expose the application as a content provider. We can create content providers, or we could use it as an application. All databases, SQLite and others, are stored in the device in the data package name databases. So you could actually go to the SD card, look under data, and look. In fact, you can do this actually when we get done with this app, and you'll see the database there. And you'll see under your package name, my database, and a list of the databases that are there. And you'll see the databases. They're a DB kind of format. What does that mean? It's kind of, well, most people, I actually just realized this the other day. Most people aren't familiar with DB, or database, old database format. But I can't remember what it was called right now. There was a couple of different database programs out there that just created files before Microsoft Access came around. But it's just like Microsoft Access. So it's like the MDB. It's a separate standalone file. You upload the file to a server. You can use the database file. Same concept here. You can upload it to a server, or you could just put it inside your app, and you're opening up the database file, reading and writing to it. So. You're going to do this one on your own. This one's the Notepad tutorial. It uses the database. In fact, if you have found that tutorial, it's a pretty interesting tutorial. So it's useful database helper class for access and crude details. So this is just basically a text that's stored in a database of notes. We have the context menu, and that is a special component. It requires context menu for holding down the selection key. Also pops up context menus. We're going to look at options menu in a few minutes. We also have this concept of the context menu. This lecture is kind of has a few different things in it because that's what we're going to be seeing in the database app. A lot of times you have to press on the back of the phone and the context menu comes up. You can populate the context menu from content from a database, and it could be names and addresses or something like that. So to pick one from to do something with. So let's see. In terms of the concept that we're going to do, we're going to see this live in a few minutes, but in order to follow a nice design pattern for a database-enabled app, it's nice to separate out the work. So you have a database helper, you have a database object that represents the database, that handles the reading and the writing to the database, and then you send queries to it from another activity. So it's a multiple activity kind of environment. So the class also holds crude details to the map object here in this particular case. This is another example we're going to see that's already completed for us. So, all right. So SQL provides advanced database features as well. SQLite. So there is transaction support. You can commit and roll back. You can also use prepared statements based on the Java SQL. So if you're familiar with JDBC or any of the Java database connective APIs, very similar to JDBC in general, runs the same way. So we can have a prepared statement. What we do is create a query and then we substitute values in on the query. We can also use variables and things with it. So it actually is very sophisticated. It follows the whole Java database standard. So you can use a cursor to keep track of the location within its result set as well. The cursor by definition is the memory that comes back out of the database. We read and write directly to the cursor in our Android app. So we load the cursor up and we have a cursor object that represents the output. So it can keep track of information that was received from the database from a query, ends up in the cursor. And then we just read the cursor and we go through each one of the rows that was returned. Think of the cursor sort of like a result set actually, but it's more of an object that we're going to use. Let's see. All right, that's enough of the PowerPoint. See, wasn't too bad, was it? Just like I say, I showed you a PowerPoint on it. All right, so what you want to do then is we want to go through our first tutorial for today in course materials. And hold on one second. There's a database PDF file, and this is a different database in here. So this one is in supplemental notes. So let's go to the tutorial section. In the tutorial sections, you see a database tutorial and a database solution. We also have another database up here, and I'm going to download this one here. It's a database example, which I believe is going to be a different one. So if you're downloading stuff, take this one here, database example, from the supplemental notes section, and then in the tutorial section, database PDF file is this one. And the database solution to that one is here. You want both because sometimes cutting and pasting from the PDF file isn't going to work for you. So, we'll see how the cut and paste works today, but haven't had very much luck lately with that. So, all right, so if I open up the database example, so we're going to see how to populate a spinner from an SQL database. And the spinner is going to be, well, you'll see the spinner object in a few minutes. So we're going to create a new project, file Android project, and we're going to call the project database or something like that. And then we're going to create an SQLite database handler class. And I'll talk about how that works as we go through it. So go ahead and start a new project. So I'm going to need to open up my Eclipse actually. Few minutes here. We go. Let me close what I've got here. Some projects in here. So you guys should all be able to do this now. Create a new Android application project. I'm going to call this one My Database. The reason why I'm doing that is just because the other one is called Database, and I want to load it in. You can't use the same project with the same name. Otherwise, you're going to have a problem. So mine's going to be called My Database, and I'm going to go ahead and click through and finish the setup here. And lo and behold, I get a new project. And here it is, My Database. Alright. So I don't necessarily need that MainActivity opened up. So the first thing we're going to do is just jump right into the database features. So we're going to create a new class, and we're going to call it Database Handler. If you call it Database Handler, then the code that we're going to use inside the MainActivity is going to work, because we're going to need to make a new instance of this class. So we're making an object, and we'll make an instance of the object inside of the MainActivity. So Database Handler, and it should follow the database operation. It'll handle all the database operations. So let me go ahead and do that. And it looks like it extends SQLite Open Helper. We can worry about that extends when we create the class, or we could just create the class. So let's just let's create it, and I'm going to extend SQLite Open Helper just in case some of these libraries have changed. That way I'll get the new imports. So it doesn't matter which way you do it. So File, New, Add Class. And this one's going to be called, I already forgot, Database Handler. Database Handler. Database Handler. And I'm going to put the superclass in here. I cut it, so I'm going to put SQLite Open Helper. It doesn't really matter if you do it that way or not. And go ahead and press Finish. Yeah, it wasn't that smart. It didn't help me figure out the includes. So instead, I'm going to put my mouse over here and import SQLite Helper. So now I have that message. It went away. And here it's going to say add construct. Ah, forget it. Oh yeah, I guess I could add now. I'm just going to copy this code, so I don't have to worry about the constructor. Alright, so in here we have a few items that we're going to use, and I thought maybe this is not a bad idea to talk about data structures as well today, because we are talking about databases and data structures, and abstract data types and stuff like that. So in the Java util, we have this thing called an array list, which is different from a regular old array. An array list is expandable, it's dynamic, so it can grow in size. Unlike traditional style arrays, we also have lists. This is all coming from Java containers. So containers have unordered lists. If you take a data structures course, if you're in my data structures course, we're going over this stuff. But long story short, it's a bunch of built-in structures, so you can just make an instance of an array list or an instance of a list. And there's also a linked list in there too. And you automatically get the list capabilities without actually having to create a linked list or an array list or a list. There's also stacks and queues and a bunch of built-in data types, data structures as well for you. All right, so in here we're going to, I was going to say I can cut and paste it, but let me try my hand. Let's see what happens. I'm optimistic. And then I'll talk about what we're putting in here in a few minutes. This might be a really bad idea, but I'm taking the whole thing and I'm going to replace the file with it and see what happens. So I took everything out of the file and I'm just going to paste this entire content in. Wow, I got lucky. That's what I was hoping for. Look at that, it worked. All right, so I just cut and pasted it in and everything worked. So let me talk about what we're doing here. We're creating a class. Oops, I got a red thing up here. Hold on one second. Let me save it. Oh, okay, good. Whew. I'm like, there's got to be a catch.
Well, what did you do with the database handler?
Actually, I just removed everything out of the file. I cut everything that was in here, copied everything that was in here, and I just pasted it in.
Okay. I still have that red X over.
If you're still having it, try saving the file, which is what I just did a few seconds ago. Still having a problem?
Yeah.
Hold on one second. While I'm gonna pause this for a second. Get all your code into here. All right, as I was saying when I was not recording, this is a majority of the code. So this is the database handler. What is database handler going to do for us? Let's take a look here. We're setting a database name here as spinner example. So we have a string. These are just variables that we're going to declare up front. So we're setting the version as database version 1. In fact, here my skull wrap didn't work. So why do we want that? I'll tell you why we want that. Because once we upgrade our app in the future and there's a new version of the database out, Android gets updated for us automatically and the new version will show up. And if we're not keeping track of what version we're on and whether we've updated it, or we're going to have a database that doesn't work. One of the things that happens all the time is Android, the operating system itself, likes to get updated. When it gets updated, we're using a service from the Android, which is the database service. Hasn't changed in a long time, but a long time ago it used to change a lot. And once it gets updated, there's a thing that you can do inside of your app. I'll show you that actually. To update your app to work with the updated database. It just makes it consistent so your app has the same language and is using the same features as the database. So if you keep track of what version you're on, then you know if you need to update or change the app to meet with any changes that were made with the database that was on the phone. Same thing true for content providers in general, actually. That stuff changes all the time, so it's nice to keep track of what version of the content provider you're using so you can keep track of it. All right, so just take that as a formality at this point. You want to give it a name, database version. It's an integer that's storing it as 1. These are static final. It's final because it's not going to change. It's static because it's being used at the class level. It's not an instance variable. So we can say database handler dot database version. Well, it's private, so we can't do that. So we'll have a private method that gets to it. But we could change the version or check to see what the version is. Yeah?
So is it just a temporary number, 1 over here? Or?
It's just arbitrary that we put 1 in there. You could put anything you want, 100 if you want, 200. You're keeping track of the version of the database that you're using when you built your app. It's a number you're giving the database. Just so you can tell if it's changed or what version you're using. Because depending upon what version of the database you're using, the database might be in a different format, the way you've created it. And then when you update things, you can change the version. It's a versioning system. Okay. All right, so we gave it a name, and the name's going to be used internally to keep track of the database that we're going to create and use in the app. We have table labels. They're going to be called labels. We have labels here for the columns. Column name is ID and name. It's going to list a bunch of IDs and names for people we're going to stick in the database. So here is our constructor. Our constructor constructs from super because we are extending from an SQLite open handler. We're going to open up a database and we're going to construct one. It's going to take this database name that we gave it with this database version. So inside the database we know the version number. We can check later on. Now we're going to create some tables in the database. So we have methods in here that are going to be used. And here's our onUpgrade. I'll explain that in a few minutes. OnCreate, when the app first opens up, then in the SQLite database, we're going to have a string here that says going to be create categories table that equals create table plus table names, table labels. Table labels is labels, where it's going to have a key integer primary key and a key text. This is SQL, by the way. Don't worry about it if you don't know SQL. It's a structured query language. It's a language used to communicate with databases. Normally we have create table, insert, update, delete, select star from table where something is equal to something. This is a create table command. Create table that's going to be called labels with, and then in opening closing brackets we have text for a key name and we have a number that's going to be an ID. Now, how are you going to know that this is an integer and how it's going to be called a double? Then it's an SQL Lite Database, so just like Oracle or MySQL, you have to learn the data types. So we have text as a data type, which is kind of odd. I don't know. Some people think it's odd. A number and integer. So, all right. Remember what I was saying before about the updated versions of these databases? We have an on upgrade. On an upgrade, what does that mean? Well, it means the database got upgraded. Something in the Android SDK changed. The database got updated. The phone, your app's now on a new phone. Something got upgraded. So what are we going to do? We're going to drop the older table if it exists and then create the tables again. So we run the onCreate database. We drop the tables and we start the tables again. Why do we want to do that? Because the tables are going to be messed up if the system upgraded itself. So drop table if it exists, and then the name of the table. Now on the upgrade, it's going to take in the integer old version and the integer new version. If I said that this version is version number 1, and now we have a new version, I can upgrade this. I can take 2 and make it 1. All it does is rebuild the tables because the software has changed on the phone and the service is different. So now we want to use the newer version of it. Don't upgrade it. Don't keep track of the versions. You're going to end up with problems in the future. So insert a new label into the labels table. So we're going to have this method here that says insert label. And the insert label is going to take SQL Lite Database, this get writable database, get the database from this, because we are the database helper, SQL helper class. And the content values is going to equal to new content values. So it's kind of like a dictionary where we have key value combos. So it's kind of like if you remember the insert command where you can say insert first name, comma, last name, comma, ID, and then you give it values. The values you give it are the values. It's the more elaborate version of the SQL insert command made into a method. So we have the content values is the structure for that type of statement, and we just populate it with values. And here we have values put key name comma label, and then insert, and then close. So like JDBC with the Java database utilities, the values put is substituting in kind of like a stored procedure actually, or excuse me, sort of like a prepared statement. Actually, it's putting in in fact, this is the same thing you do for a prepared statement. The key name is name, and the label, whatever the label is going to be, it's going to be a string that's going to be sent to it. So the label's coming in from running this. I'm going to say insert label, and the label might be, bhacker or something, and then bhacker is going to be put into the name by the put value. And then here we're going to insert a row. db.insert, which db is the instance of the database that we're getting from the writable database. Very abstract, I must say. We have this database object out there and we're the helper for it, but we don't get the object. We just make ourselves an instance of the object using this. So this is the get writable database, our database that we're going to call it. We have a name for it, it's up there, but I think it's called labels or something. It's called a spinner example. Anyway, long story short, very abstract. That's why I kind of wanted to go through this. So get all the labels, return the list of labels here. So our list is the data type that's going to be returned. It's going to return a list. And this is what they call a template string, which means we have a list of strings. If you know C++, worked with template classes, or if you've worked with the container class from Java utils, from data structures in Java, This could be integer, float, double. It just basically templates the data structure to hold strings, which is where we get this opening and this closing. So this would be, if we did this, these are cast. That's a cast. Some people are familiar with that as a data cast. This is a template. It says use string as the data type, template type. It's a generic list, but now it's string list now. If we leave it out, we can actually hold mix and match data types in there. So it's going to return a string that's going to be a list of strings. And we're calling the method getAllLabels because we're going to go into the database, query the database for all of the labels. We only have two things. We have a label and a number. Get all the labels, which are going to be names or whatever, and return the results in this list. And that way we can just print the list out. And we're going to print the list out to a spinner. So select all query. Well, this hopefully looks familiar. Select star from database name. There's no where clause, but this is going to be called, this is a string. Creating it, we're just pre-populating it. You don't necessarily have to do this. You could just send it this string if you wanted to, but it's easier to send it the select query. Where it says select star from the name of our database. So then we have, again, another instance of the object that's sitting out there in space that we can't really see, that's very abstract, called the database. So we say SQLite database is equal to get readable database. Up here it was get writable database because we were inserting, we were writing something into it. Now we're going to read from it. So get readable database. The cursor is here, the cursor's not up here. So when we insert, we don't get a result set. It comes back and says, one row completed, thank you, have a nice day. When we run a query, we get a result set. So if you don't like the word cursor, call it a result set. But it is a cursor. But cursor comes from database theory. It's memory. It's the memory that's stored on the database that's temporary, that's a cached set of the results. It holds the result set. So it's more of a memory location versus the result set. The result set's a little bit different. It's the keys and the value pairs and combos. And we query the result set. We get it from the cursor. So we create a cursor object, cursor, we could call it my cursor, that equals the database raw query, select query, and we're not giving it the second parameter, which would probably, I don't even remember what that is right now, we're just leaving it null. So this cursor contains the result set from the raw query. When we run the raw query, we just get a result set back that's not formatted. It's formatted as a result set with the metadata, so we know the results rows, we know the row titles, and we know the data that's inside of the row, inside of the columns that are in each one of the rows. And we get as many rows back as we have in the database because we did a select star. All right, so we're going to loop through all the rows and add it to a list. And this is the list here, data structure that's a string type, and we have strings that we're getting back. So here's the great part. So this is going to come back true or false. If move to first, we have move to last, move to first, we have next, 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 to go through. So we're going to use this move to next, actually. I'm thinking of Java next right now for the list. But long story short, this is going to come back true if there's anything in the result. So if there's nothing in the result set, it's going to come back false. So if we can move to the first one, great. Then we're going to do this. Labels.add. Well, labels.add. Labels is a list here. That's going to be a new array list. So the array list is different from a list. The array list has an index associated with it, like an array that we have in programming. 0, 1, 2, 3, each one of the items. So we can get, the only advantage you get over an array list versus a list is the indexed, is access to the index values, basically. So labels.add cursor.getString1. Well, that's going to be the first item. And we're getting it as a string. We're going to return it as a string because it is a string. How do we know that? Well, we don't know that. We could find out what it was, but we already know what the database contains, so we're going to retrieve it like that. And then while cursor.move to next, while true, moves to next, we got another one, we got another one, we got another one. So kind of like a for loop, but not. Interesting looping pattern, very efficient. You're going to see this when working with databases. Just copy that down and just use it every time you have to go through the result set. It's very efficient. Works great. It'll stop when there's no more. You don't have to see how many do we get in the result set. You don't have to go next all the way through and look for the end or anything. So while we can move to the next. All right, so then we're going to close the connection. Cursor.close, close the database, db.close, and then return the labels. And that's a string. Excuse me, that's a list of strings that we're going to return out of here. These are the only things we have in this file that we just put in here. Rather than typing all of that stuff ourselves, it was easier just to paste it in there.
But this type of list is different from like a Python list where it's all unique results.
Different from a Python list.
Well,
Yes,
okay.
Python is dynamically typed. That we just strongly typed it with a template. We said that these guys are all strings. In Python, you can have numbers, strings, arrays, lists inside of lists. And this list is more, if you remember the old linked list concept in C++, this is a linked list actually. It's implemented like a linked list, which is different from this list, array list, which is an array list.
Right.
Implemented like an array. But we didn't have to say array with 25 things in it. We don't know how many things are going to be in there, actually. So the reason why an array list is being used is because it's dynamically sized. It's still typed. We're still saying that strongly typed to a string. We're templating it as a string, which is like the standard template libraries and the libraries you get. So C++ data structures have standard template libraries that look just like this, work just like this. But this is the Java version of it. If you're not familiar with C++, don't worry about it. If you're not familiar with Java, take a data structures class. Actually, because you're not going to get this in Java either. This is data structures. But we're in Android, so I can kind of fly through it with a minimal explanation. Problem with this class is unless you've had a Java programming class, it's hard to put things in perspective. I did actually cover data structures in the object-oriented programming with Java. But you'll learn more about that. Just know that we have built-in data types that we can use, and we're just making an instance of one of those. All right. So now you can close the database handler class. We're pretty much done with that one. And now let's go back to the instructions here. We're gonna need to put a spinner out there. So we're gonna create the spinner drop-down. So we're gonna open up the activity underscore main XML file, and we're gonna create a spinner drop-down using the following XML code. All right. So the following code is a simple form, and it's created with an edit text and a spinner on it. Now let's see how bad the form looks. Not so bad. It's a linear layout. I'm going to take just the two items that I need. The text view, which is going to say add new label. The edit text and the button, as well as the text view that's going to say selected label with the spinner, the drop-down spinner. And I'm going to leave the outer code here, which is the linear layout, because I don't like the linear layout. I like the relative one, and I think my project's going to have a relative in there. Plus, then I don't have to worry about the starting tag. So into my layout, open up your layout. Yes, it is relative, actually. Let's see. So right here where it says that, look, I'm going to get rid of the text field that's already there. I'm going to paste those components in here. Alternatively, you could drag them over if you wanted to. If you drag them over, what you're getting, or what you should drag over then, is a text label and put add new label in there. And edit text fields where you could put the label that you're going to put in that little text field. A button, and the button is, oh, we didn't do our main activity yet. The button, on the main activity, the button's going to run that method to insert. And then the text layout here, text view that's going to select a label. So if we take a look at the picture, let's see, move this down a little bit. Maybe I should have used a linear layout. All right, let me go back and fix my layout. Let's go linear. Alright, so let me try one more thing then. It's going to take the whole thing. Because the tags are different on the linear than they are on the tags are different than the relative ones, so plus I don't feel like messing around with it. So now I'm going to take this whole thing out. Let's see if this works actually. It's a good test to see if it works. This one appears to be working a little bit better, and I got a little bit more predictable results here. Before with my relative layout, well, because I wasn't specifying the relative positions, they're all on top of each other. So you just saw I just pasted the entire text of the XML file in here, and I don't have any error messages, so it's probably safe for you to do the same, actually. So it says add a new label, and then the button's going to be, we're going to put in the MainActivity class the code to make a new instance, and then select label, it's going to have a new spinner in here. We don't have the spinner built yet, but the spinner is here. So here's the spinner item here. It's going to say item number 1 with sub-item. You'll see what a spinner is in a few minutes when we look at it. But the spinner in the code is right here. So you can change properties of the spinner if you want. So we all have our interface built. Alright, so go ahead and save it and close it. You shouldn't get any error messages or anything. Now we have to do the main activity. Main activity is going to essentially work with the interface. So this is kind of like our view controller actually. It's going to take a look at the button and see what happens. So, and when the application first loads up, we're going to load the spinner data. So load spinner data is going to be called from the onCreate method, and it's going to load the data from the SQL Lite Database, but the database hasn't been created yet. So when we first open up the app, it's not going to show up anything, and then we have to put some stuff in there. And once the add button is clicked, the new label is going to be inserted into the database. After the new label is inserted, we're going to call the load spinner data again, and it's going to be called it's going to load the spinner up with the new things that are in here. So let's see. Trying to decide what I want to paste. This looks pasteable. All right, I'm going to take my chances here. We'll see what happens. So far, so good. I'm going to everything except for the package information. I'm going to be bold here. Once I paste it in, I'll fix it, and we'll see what happens. So go in now in our source code folder. Oh, wow, I did this one. Well, I don't have them in the same. So I'm going to take my default handler that I created. I'm going to drag it into the same package. So I'm going to, actually I'll do it the opposite way. I'm going to take this main activity, I'm going to drag it up this way. You want to make sure that they're in the same package, because if they're not in the same package, they're not necessarily going to find each other unless packages are public. So on the main activity here, I just opened that up, and you see, actually this is a good example of what happens when you do that. So I moved main activity, and I moved it from my other package that I created, and I put it inside of the default package, and then I got rid of the other one. And now I have this line up here. Remove that line. That line is going to cause you problems further down the road. It's talking about an R. Anything talking about an R, get rid of it. There's no such thing as the resource r.jot. And this stuff here, get rid of this stuff too. Anything with an R next to it, get rid of it. Just take it out. Now down here, I'm going to see r.layout.activity. Get rid of the R. There's a layout. Wait a minute, we have to have R. I'm sorry. r.activity. Forget that comment. All right. Let me save this one here. What's wrong? We don't have activity main? Yes, we do. Hold on a second. Let me put the package back in correctly. What's wrong with my main activity? Let's take a look here.
Something must be wrong with that signal.
Yeah, it's possible, but it's not because this one's working. I don't have anything wrong with the XML file. XML file looks good. So I'm going to do a thing here. I'm going to save it. And now I'm going to clean it. I'm going to clean it now. So I'm going to go to Project Clean. Let's clean her up a little bit. And see, nope, cleaning didn't work either. So let's see. Hover my mouse over and it's going to say import. No, we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. It still thinks we're in the other package. So let's see. 1 second. I'm going to come over here, change something, save it. So it rebuilds the R file. No. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to do something else. This was called MainActivity, right? So I'm going to go File, New, Class. I'm going to call this Another Activity. Finish. Now I'm going to take this one here. We don't really need it because it's just generic. I'm going to go ahead and delete it. And recall this one MainActivity. So I'm going to do a refactor. Perfect. Now I have to add the code for it. So did you guys just see, I know I kind of went through it just while talking to myself because you guys were talking to yourselves. Do you see what I did to troubleshoot that? There was nothing wrong with that file. There was absolutely nothing wrong with it. But the r.java file was out of sync. The clean didn't work. Saving, so first of all, I usually try a clean first. If that doesn't work, then I'll go to the XML file or go to one of the resources and save it. Because every time you save it, the r.java file rebuilds itself. That didn't work either, so I just got rid of the file. Got rid of the file, recreated it, renamed it. So now I'm back in business. See, it's not really Eclipse, or is it Eclipse? I don't know. It's the automated features of Eclipse that cause you that problem. All right, so now I'm going to cut and paste this code from the lecture and stick it inside of the, now I can get rid of everything in here and just paste it in here. I probably could have, perhaps, let's see, I probably could have maybe just did the other file and got rid of it, and that would have worked. But in any case, let me go through what I have, and I'll fix the errors as I go through it. I'm still having a problem with the r.java file. Interesting. Okay. Let's see. Spinner, local variable spinner. So it won't take it from the r.java file. Yes, let's try saving it. That's a good idea. No. It's still having problems with my r.java file. What were you saying? Excuse me? I did. I did. So let's take a look here. I could try deleting R. Because for some strange reason it doesn't want to update itself. Alright. Save this one. See how I deleted it and it actually recreated itself? Which is actually interesting. Interesting. It wants to be in the it wants to be in example okay, so what I'm going to do now then is move it back into the package it wants to be in. Or I could import it from up here. Alright. This package doesn't exist because I removed it. It's not in there. But it thinks it's in there. So I'm going to put this back in here temporarily. It thinks that this file, even though I renamed it, got rid of it, and put it back, it thinks it belongs in com.example.mydatabase because I moved it out of the package. So, anyway. Let's see. Add spinner element, context. Spinner. Hold on one second. I'm also correcting some word wrapping that happened here. All right, so now I believe I actually might have some working code here. So let's take a look at what we're doing here. So this is the main activity, extends activity, implements the on-item selected listener. It's a listener that we're going to put. We actually have another listener, event listener tutorial that I'm going to go through. But there's 3 different ways of doing this actually. But this is the one way that we've been doing it most consistently so far. And when an item is selected, the on-item selected listener picks up the item index, and then we can process it for what it is. What we're going to do is when we select the item, it's going to put up a little toast message that says, hey, this is the one you selected. So we have a couple of elements that we're going to use in the code. We have a spinner, which is going to be a spinner. We have a button add, and then we have the input label, which is going to be the edit text. So on the create, this is pretty standard. We've seen this many times. We're going to run the super on create. We're going to set the context view to the r.layout.activity main. If you're still having a problem, put this line back up here. Just hover your mouse over and put it back in. I'm probably the only one who did that. I don't know. Depends on if you move it into another folder. All right, so the spinner is going to be from the ID spinner. When we pasted the code into the XML file, we called the spinner. And the button was called the button_add. And the input label was called the input_label. So now we have our 3 items from the set context view. So this should look familiar to you at this point. We've done this about 5 or 6 times already. OnClickListener should hopefully start looking a little bit more familiar to you as well. There's an onClick event that happens with an onClickListener, and this one is the onClickListener. So we're setting the onClickListener on the button. So the button add.set onClickListener to this new onClickListener. And the onClickListener, you might notice, is actually inside the code for the set onClickListener. So I have a tutorial I'm going to give you on these listeners actually, but this is a second way of doing it. This is what they call an anonymous listener. So it's a listener only attached to one button. If we took the listener out, gave it a method name, and then put the method name on all of the buttons, that would not be anonymous. That would be a named listener, and then we'd have an onClickListener event that we could add. This is anonymous because it's embedded in with the call. What's it going to do on click? We're going to create a string, and the string is going to be called label, and it's going to be input string get text to string. Remember the old toString Java method returns string from get text. So it converts it to a string for us. And then if the label length is larger than 0, which means we got something, wasn't empty, then the database DB is going to be equal to a new database handler. And the database handler is going to be get application context. Well, it's just going to get this, or the application context. Well, that's like this, actually. That's ourselves. So we insert the new label from the using the db.insert label that came from the DB helper. So we made an instance of this DB handler class. And the instance of the handler class is a handler for ourselves. That's another kind of odd abstract concept again. So we're making a new input field text to blank input field, input label.set text to 0 or to empty. So we're hiding the keyboard with that actually, because we're going back, we're setting the focus back to the text. And then the input method manager, let's see, input method service, get system service from the input method service, and this hides the key, hide soft input from window. This essentially just gets rid of our keyboard. This is going to set the text, after we put the label in, we get the text from it, we're going to set the text to 0 in a little edit window, and then we're going to hide the keyboard. A lot of window text, but I mean a lot of method call and object creation to hide a keyboard, but unfortunately we don't have a resigned first responder out here, so, which is what we do in iOS. So it's the input method manager, which is really the first responder actually. So then we're going to load the spinner data. That's a method that's right here, load spinner data. Okay, from the load spinner data, we're going to return back, and then if else, we're going to set up a little text message, a little message that says please enter a label, and then the label is going to be running, I don't like the way this is word wrapped, a message toast that's going to be .show the toast message. We've looked at toast messages already. It's taking it from the get application context, which is our application, or this. So imagine it just being this, actually, the get application context. All right, so down here in our database helper, here's a function to load. This is the load spinner data. We have a method here, and what's wrong with my formatting? Well, because there's an error, it's not going to like me here. Yeah. Hold on a second. Drop down list style, list view with radio button, list adapter, data adapter, and then what did you say? You were helping me out. This is wrong. This has to go up here. And I still have a problem with labels. Labels is up.
Space actually after labels. The declaration of db.get all
db
yeah, that
labels is equal to, here we go. No, I got it. I just have to, it's from the paste job. So, thank you. Sometimes you guys are doing it while I'm talking, so you might be a step ahead of me, which you are. So, there we go. All right, so the load spinner data is going to use the, make a new instance of the database handler. That's the database handler object that we've been looking at so far. I still have redness here, let me. Is that somebody's computer? Hmm. All right, now that we're all paying attention, or some of us are. All right, we have the database handler, new instance, and now we have another list. The list is going to be strings. This is the same thing we did before, but this one we're going to do database get all labels, which is the query that's going to go select star from the database and return it as a string list. So the list equals the list. So list labels is equal to the list we're getting from the database object that says get all labels. So we're running that method inside the database object. And then we're going to create an adapter for the spinner. This is going to be an array adapter that's going to hold a string. And it's going to be our data adapter. It's going to be a new array adapter. This from Android r.layout simple spinner item, which is the spinner item that we stuck out there. Labels, which is the array that we're going to put, excuse me, is the list called labels that we ran to get all the labels from the database class. Now we're going to have a drop-down style list view with a radio button. So the list adapter, this should say .set drop-down view resource with a simple spinner drop-down item and attach it to, so spinner.set adapter to the data adapter. When you see this working, it might make a little bit more sense to you, but all we're doing is querying the database, getting all of the labels that are in the database, putting them into a list, having the list equal to this list here, taking the list, putting it into an adapter. The array adapter is nothing more than another abstract concept to give us both items that are in there, the number and the name that's in the label that's going to show up in the spinner. And so when we click on the spinner, it drops it down and shows us all the information. Because we have two items that are in that database that we select star from.
So it's basically a dictionary.
Just like a dictionary, yeah. But you'll see it expands it, so when you click on it, it opens it up. Or depending upon how the interface is set. Okay, here's our on item selected. And it's selected on the adapter view, which is our adapter view here. Array adapter. Adapter view, which is the view of the adapter. New view, position, ID. On the selected item, we're going to set the label equal to the parent.get item at position, the position that we clicked on, to string. And then we're going to show a toast message, and the toast message is going to be showing a selected spinner toast message item toast, make toast, parent, get context. You selected this one, essentially. And then do nothing selected. Well, we don't. We actually need this method overridden, but we're not putting anything in it. So we put again another listener on another adapter that we have in there. It's the array list adapter, and the array list adapter is showing the items that are inside of the spinner. So now I still have red, so let me save my red. My red went away. Now I'm going to attempt to run it to see what I get. There is a lot of talking in here. Alright, so I'm loading up my emulator. I'm going to run this thing, see what it looks like. Cross my fingers. I still left that package thing in here. This bothers me. That bothers me. Because technically it's all, but I didn't refactor, I just moved it, which is what the problem is. Connect my emulator. Well, shoot, I'll just type it in. Connected. Alright, so I'm going to run it. Alright. I think it's that package, my database. Did you see that? Yeah, it's the package. Yeah. So let's go back. You know, because the manifest has the other package in it. I just realized why I'm having a problem with that package. As I mentioned before, that's not a good idea. I took it because it was working, but really what the problem is in the manifest.
Android manifest,
Yep.
package will be still combat example, the old package, right?
That's what the problem is right there. So I got two choices. I either change the package from default to com example database, or change it here and leave it out. Let's just put default in here. I don't know if default is actually going to work. I could just leave it blank. Let's see what happens if I leave it blank. Not going to like that either. Alright, let's not leave it blank. I'm now going to put back in here, what was it called before? Com dot example. Com dot example. My database. Small d. I used a small d. Where do you see it? That's correct. Yep, you're right, it is correct. Oh, here it is here. Alright, so hold on one second. New package. Example dot my database. Let's move her back. Get rid of this line. So I moved them both into the same package called com example my database. So now I have them both in the same package. Let's see if I have any better luck running it now. Bring this up so I can see the response immediately. Whoops. Oh well, let's just take my chances here. Alright, so you've just seen another live example of what happens when the package information doesn't even though the program compiled and worked just fine, you brought it up, all I saw was that exception. The window flashed pretty quickly, but I saw it said com example my database in there. And I removed that package by deleting it and removing it instead of refactoring it, which has caused the problem to begin with. I probably should have just refactored it. Then I was ending up with another situation because it couldn't find, MainActivity couldn't find the database handler, and it wanted a separate import for it. So long story short, I moved them both into the same package to find it, and now it works. So let's see if the app works actually. So long story short, that's the type of troubleshooting you're going to need to do. That is exactly what you need to do to fix these types of situations. Either that or you start over. So it's got to be one thing or another. It's usually the project. It has nothing to do with Android. It has nothing to do with Java programming. It's all about that entire Eclipse interface and the IDE that you're working with. All right, so now I'm going to put a new label in here. I'm going to put my name in here actually. And I'm pressing add. And I'm clicking on it and I'm not seeing anything. Man, why don't I see something? All right, hold on a second. I seem to be frozen. So I'm going to do something else now. I'm frozen. I'm going to put the finished product in there because I've messed with it so much. I know that the finished product will work if I could find it. Here it is. Here. So if you downloaded the one that said apdatabase.zip, there's a thing called a database demo in here. Let's see if it's the same one. I'm pretty sure it is actually, but let's still take a look here. Oh, I shut Android down. I know I shut the emulator down. I didn't realize I closed Android. Yours might actually work. So I'm going to import in, let's see, I'm going to select import, and I'm going to import in from the Android existing code into Workspace, and I'm going to take it from my downloaded file location, for which I put it in, where did I put it? Let's move it so I can find it. Database demo, I'm going to put it right there on my desktop. Android into Workspace, database demo, on desktop. So you can see inside of our, this is actually more, this is more to it than what we just looked at. We have the database helper inside of this other example. So let me talk about this other example real quick. The other program probably would work if I were able. Did anyone actually get it to work? Okay, so several people got it to work. Mine would probably work if I rebuilt it from scratch without changing the package stuff around. Did you have a question?
Yeah, it was giving me an error.
What error is it giving you?
Failed to allocate memory.
Failed to allocate memory. That's a serious error. I had to allocate more memory. I'd allocate more RAM to your emulator. If you're getting an allocation on memory error when you run it, it's because the emulator doesn't have enough RAM to store the database creation. It actually has to create a database on your device, on your emulator. If there's not enough memory, it's going to give you an error message. All right, so this one here, let me just run this one here. Oops, actually I have to connect later again. Hold on one second. So I downloaded the other one I told you about initially, and the other one is called Database Demo. If I run the Database Demo, it's a slightly different example, but it contains the same portion we just looked at. It's just a little bit more sophisticated. As you possibly see, it's a little bit more sophisticated. We have an add employee, and then we have another item over here. We have the tabs. So remember the tabs? It's two applications in one. We have one with an employee, which is the same database helper and the same thing that we just looked at a few minutes ago. And then on the first tab it says add employee. So if I add an employee, and this is the spinner, by the way. And the spinner, you open it up. My other spinner was supposed to show me the two items that were from the database. This one has three items: sales, IT, HR, which are the three different departments. So, which is in the select department. So I actually have to select a department in order for that to work. So, yes, we're going to have an exception here. Great. Hold on one second. Let me get out of this one. Okay. All right. So if I add a person into this database here, I'm going to say, and I put an age in here, 21, and select a department, sales, add employee, add new employee, employee added successfully. This functionality, which I'll show you in a few minutes, is identical to what we just did. But instead of adding a name and a number to a list, or actually it wasn't a number, it was just a name to a list, we're adding employees to the list. And we have attendance. So let's take a brief moment to observe the attendance. Okay, we're back after our long-awaited attendance break. Okay, so I'm going to backtrack a little bit because I loaded up a different example. I figured I might as well just show you where the original example was. If you haven't figured it out already, right underneath where it says Database Tutorial, there is a database solution, which will have the same code I just went over in the database, and this is also in the tutorial section. The database example that I'm showing you next, which I kind of just jumped through initially, is this one here. It's in the supplemental notes section. Oops, right above it. There's a section called supplemental notes. That one's called database example. It's the simple tutorial plus tabs plus two spinners instead of one. And one spinner is being used for a selection. It's a lot more detailed, a lot more than the original example. The original program, you run it looks like this. This is the solution running. So if I were to put a name in here, like Mary as an example, click on the add button, it says you selected Barbara. Oh, that's great. That's because this, when you change the selection, will tell you what you selected. Now it says I selected Mary. So in here, when I open it up, these are the labels. So if I put in here Larry, Mary, and now it says Barbara because Barbara's selected. Now I have Larry in here. And you see on the side there's like these little buttons, selection buttons that turn green. So it's kind of a primitive, this is a spinner, by the way. It's kind of a primitive spinner example. The other example is called the database demo. If you load this one up, this is the one we left off with a few minutes ago, right before the attendance break. If I load this one up, I see I can add new people to the database. So this one is taking three pieces of information, one coming from a spinner. So if I change the spinner to IT as an example, and then if I say employee name Bob and his age is 50 and he's in the IT department, if I press on the add, it'll say new employee added. Now I have two employees instead of one. Before it said one. If I click on the employees tab, then I should see two employees and I only see one. Oh, that's because it says sales up here. So if I select Department of IT, I should see Bob in IT. Here we go, here's Bob. He's in IT. So it seems more sophisticated, but it's really a combination of everything we did in the first database tutorial, plus tabs. You remember last week we looked at the tabs? So we have this activity and we have this activity. If you wanted to extend this further, you could put a little image. In fact, we did that. We put a little image on the tab. And then we have the add button. The add button is going to open up the database, uses the same database handler, different methods. Add these guys into it. And then we have a spinner here where we can select the department. And then over in the employees, we have a spinner here where we can select the department. And then we just simply list out. We're simply listing out the text that's in the database, the result set. So if we'd like to take a look at the code, we see that it is very similar to what we built, but we have everything broken out a little bit more. The reason why this one's put together is to show you a little bit more sophisticated example, but also to show you something about the design pattern. So what we've got here, is this recording? No, okay, it should be. Okay, good. The add employee is a separate functionality that's an activity. The activity to add the employee. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but just to let you know, what it's doing is it's taking the items that we were adding in there, and it's using this database helper. And the database helper is the new class that we're going to use here, the database helper. And it's a very similar concept. It's a database helper that, click on the database helper, extends the SQLite open helper, where it's going to do the same thing we were looking at a few minutes ago. OnCreate executes a bunch of commands to create the databases. We're going to have an onUpgrade, here we go, an onUpgrade. It's going to take and drop the table if it exists and recreate it. It's going to have a lot more sophisticated code in it. So what you can do is kind of go through, if you're a learn by example kind of person, you can go through and take a look at, it's everything we just looked at with a few more lines of code, actually, a lot more functionality. It's the basis of what we just looked at, though. It's just repeated over and over again. We have a database update. We can delete the database. We're updating a database. So in the dialog listener, that's nothing more than an on-click event that's happening on an on-click listener. And I have a little thing on on-click listeners and listeners I'm going to probably look at next. But and then the concept of an employee, and the employees are what we're adding, the sales department, the IT department, and these are the employees. And the employees have a name, age, and a department. So we have a separate object that illustrates that. So what you want to do is kind of break the program out into separate objects. And we're going to do this, make your database helper a separate object. And your database helper manages everything associated with the database. If you do that, and you have a generic database helper, in fact, you could use that one as an example, you just add that to your project. And then you just put the database helper in there, and you don't have to rewrite all that code. It's already given for you. Just change the name of the database, change the components. Spinners are quite often used to give you, because spinners don't take up whole entire app page. You know, in fact, you can actually have the spinner open up with 3 items or 5 items instead of just one showing. So you can have like a list that you can just scroll through the list. It makes a better use of the real estate on the screen versus.
Spinner, you think of the Apple iOS.
Yeah.
Like spinning, this is drop down.
This is Android. No offense to Android lovers, but it's not iOS.
So does Android have a iOS spinner?
No.
Oh, nice.
So that's what, you know, I don't know, I'm probably the only one who thinks this, but I think Android itself, from the UI perspective, is very primitive compared to iOS. iOS has so much more sophisticated GUI controls and components that you can't even compare the two of them. So obviously I lean towards iOS, but this is an Android class. And to be fair to Android, Android has more flexibility. You could create one. Problem is it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in the standard libraries. If you want one that looks like the iOS, you have to create it yourself. Can you create it yourself in iOS? No. So you don't have the option to create it yourself in iOS. They just give it to you. And you use the same one, and all your iOS apps look the same. On Android, they don't give it to you. So you have to create it yourself. But you can make it look different. You could put, you know, different motif on it. Like, you know, you can make the spinner look more, I don't know. You can customize the look and feel of it because you have more control over it. So there's less consistency in the GUI look and feel, but there's more flexibility, more control. It does have the pros and cons. You know, I personally like the way that iOS apps look because they are pretty standard. They are pretty consistent because you can't change anything. a lot of Android apps, it's kind of like, remember when Facebook, or no, MySpace first came out and people were learning HTML, and you had like, it looked like a clown was threw up in a blender, thrown in a blender, and it threw up all over the page, and there's like white text on white background and jumping, flashing, animated everything. Some Android apps remind me of that because you do have the freedom, but they don't know what to do with it. It just looks like it looks crappy. But in all honesty, though, you can't say that does not look equivalent to an iOS app. If I did this app on iOS, it'd look more impressive. Just something this simple would look so much better. So, but you have to. iPhones cost more than Android phones. I don't know. Anyway, in preparation of the next example, I decided to open up an emulator, and I have one here. I'm going to actually close this emulator now, unless we have any questions about the database applications. What I showed you is a simple database helper object that works with a main activity. This demo is going to show you a lot more. It's all the same pieces again, put back together. So study the example, take a look at it. You can't learn how to do this by listening to me. It's better to play around with it. Make the address book do more. Actually, it's a fully running address book. You can use it as a template for your next for the next time that you want to create a database application. So I'm going to close the database applications down and talk a little bit about SMS messaging. We're going to create, because we've been looking at content providers, we're going to create one, content providers. We're going to create one that uses the content provider, and it's going to be using messaging, text messaging. In order to simulate this among the emulators, we need 2 emulators. So I got this one, which is great. This is a 554 on port 554. If you want to run this, open up 2 emulators. You know, I'm asking a lot from some of the smaller footprint computers. But go into, the way you're going to open this up is you're going to go into Window, and you're going to go into the Android Virtual Device Manager, and you're going to select an emulator, and you're going to click on Start. And I have mine in a very low resolution, and I have mine set for a 480 by 480. Nothing really much to it. It's going to start up my emulator, and it's going to tell me that my changes won't be persistent. Yes, of course I know that. When the emulator's gone, the emulator's gone. So now I have 2 little Android guys in here, and they should be on 2 separate ports. If you want to test the SMS stuff, this is what you have to do. Repeat which step? Okay, if you have a built-in emulator, you cannot test the SMS stuff using the VirtualBox emulators. So you have to use the built-in ones. If you've got, or if you don't have it already, it's really easy to put one together. You go into Window, and then go into Android Virtual Device. Make an emulator if you don't have one. I have one for 2.3, and I have one for 3.0. I just basically opened up 2 of the 2.3s. Click on the emulator to select it. Click on the Start button. If you click on the Start button, you'll end up with 2 little Androids eventually if you do it twice. And then I got 2 little emulators. This one is on 554, this one's on 556. And remember, my VirtualBox was on 555, so it skipped it. This one's loading up. So instead of building the example, I'm going to just open up the example. Talk about SMS messaging. So this one is called SMS messaging. Here, actually, I'll do you the honors of looking at the PowerPoint or PDF file at the same time. Where are you going to find this one? You're going to find it in tutorials. No, you're not going to find it in tutorials. Supplemental notes. Supplemental notes. That's because it's not really a tutorial, it's a note. SMS messaging source code examples. Download this one right here. There's one up here that says Android SMS information. download that one there. So the one is on the top. It says Android SMS information, send supplemental notes. And the source code that goes along with it is SMS messaging source code examples. So the Android SMS information is your reading. It is about 4 pages of reading. I'm not going to read it to you. This is your homework if you want to read it yourself. We don't have a textbook for the course, but here's your textbook. Go ahead and if you want, read through this one. I'm going to save you the read for your own. Instead, I'll go through the code, receiving messages, sending messages. But this is the textbook kind of information that goes along with it. The examples used in that lecture go along with the examples used in the downloaded example. So let me get rid of, now I have my 2 emulators running, so I'm in good shape. I'm getting rid of the database stuff I had out there. So if I unzip the ap.sms.ex example folder, I'm going to have 2. Now one is going to be called SMS demo, the other one is going to be called SMS examples. There's 2 of them in here, and let's take a look. So I'm going to go into Android, into Eclipse, and I'm going to import both projects into one. So at one time. So if I do that, I'll show you how to do that. File import. Existing Android code into workspace. Next. Browse. I put it on my desktop. If I just click on the directory, without clicking on the individual projects, I can do them both at the same time. So click on the directory out here. It says AP, it stands for Android phone, SMS-example, open. See how they both end up in here? A little quicker. Click on finish. Now I have 2. So the one that says SMS demo has one file in it, one source code file. It says send SMS activity. So this activity is used with the built-in SMS intent to send out an SMS message. So it sends out a message using an intent, which is what we've seen already. The reason why we don't have to build this is we've built already about 3 or 4 different activities that use an intent. We're going to intent service provider, and what I'm going to intent with SMS, text messaging. So you could do the same thing with a telephone as well. You can make your own dialer if you wanted to, your own Android dialer, which is actually kind of fun. All right, so SMS activity extends activity. We have a button. The button's going to say send on it. There you create. We're going to take the layout, which is main. Let's take a look at the layout actually. So if I go into the resource folder and I go into layout, I look at main.xml. And this is a very old program actually, so it kind of looks like this. There's one little button here. It says send on it. Just a button. If I look at the XML code, I just see a button on there. It says send. And alright. So that's our main XML. So let's see. That's what we're going to use for the main activity. The little button sending. We have an OnClickListener. On the OnClickListener, what are we going to do? We're going to say, we're going to take and create an intent, which is going to be called send intent. And the intent is going to be a new intent, and the intent is on an action view, which is going to be an action that's going to be performed. So we're going to stick in here, because we're going to call the service, and this is how we're getting the service here. We're going to set the type to the MMS-SMS, which is the service that's our intent service that we're going to use, that's on the phone that does our text messaging for us. We also have one for voice dialing. We also have one for internet, for default browsers, for notifications. We have a bunch of different items on here. How are you going to learn that? You need to get one of those little reference books. And you have to get it for, this is why I loaded up a 2.33 emulator. This is a 2.33 project. You can tell up here it says Android 2.33. If I say that right. Because this sucker changes. If you're loading this on a higher level emulator or a non-Android emulator, you're using a VirtualBox emulator, you're probably going to have a problem with it. The service is named differently. That's why I loaded up two of the Android ones, because it's more guaranteed to work that way. Okay, so send intent, put extras. This is the SMS body default content that you're going to use. Well, the default content is just going to be a little text, a little piece of text. We'll see how it works in a few minutes. Start activity, the intent. Make sure if there's an exception, catch the exception. All you're doing, this is it. This is the entire code, by the way. Because we're using all the functionality on the phone. We're using it through an intent. The intent, this is a type of intent, by the way. It's called an action view, which means perform an action. So it's the same thing we did actually for the contacts. The action view and the contacts opened up the contacts for us. This is going to open up our send, because we're going to do on our send intent, we're going to put the extras of the message body and the default context. So we're going to open up the send of a text message. Let's see how this works. We'll demo it so you can see what I'm talking about. Same thing we did actually with the contacts list. So you notice there's only a button on the interface. There's nothing else. So if there were something else on there, it would be a text box, but there's no text box. So we're going to send it using the text message program that's on the emulator. So if you open it up, I see I have two screens here. I can run it on 554 or I can run it on 556. I'm going to select 554. I'm going to open up 554. And 554 is this guy here. All I have is this little button. When I push the button, it runs the intent. That's my default text messaging program on the emulator. The button is just running it's my app. When I do that, the intent's going to get that and send the text message. Same thing as I did when I took the contact from the contacts list and I put it in the edit text box from last week. This is a continuation of that concept. We just go to the content provider, we get what we want. What we're getting here is the service we're going to send the text. How are we going to know the text is going to work? Well, that's kind of easy actually. We can see it work. So I'm going to send a text to 556. So I'm going to type in oops, wrong screen. We don't want this one here. Here, let me go back to this one. This one thinks I'm dialing. Okay, go back. Okay, over here. 5556. And I'm going to say, hello from 5554. And then I'm going to send. And look at this. I have a new message that came in. So if I come over here, I see it says hello from 5554. If I click on it, over here you can see looks the same. Well, I didn't run the app on this one over here. I ran it on this one over here. But the app on this one over here just brought up, it basically was an app that had an activity that made an intent. The intent brought up the SMS window for me. That's the easy one. That's the one, no shot. That's the app with, this is the entire body of the app. Which is actually kind of easy when you think about it. And it's all because of this part here. We're putting the extras, we're putting the SMS body in the default context. Where did we get that? Well, that's what came in, where it said default context on the bottom. So if I run this app again over here, let's just pull this guy off, because this guy's got the app on it. He should be in, actually I just had it up, I probably should have just left it. This one's called SMS something. Nope, don't want music. No SD card. I think it's this one actually. So I get default content. Well, default content showed up, so I sent the text to show up in the body from the SMS body. I gave it default context. The next one I'm going to show you is going to do this, but it's not going to bring up, we're not going to do an action view, we're not going to view the SMS window messaging. Instead, we're going to use the service. Why reinvent the wheel? You want to send a text message out, just have your program do it. So send it the body of this, the address of that, and then when you click the button, it just sends it. So you don't have to work with the interface of the content provider that's giving it to the server. So here, this is the content provider giving us this. So we're setting the type of the intent to the MMS, SMS, and then we're starting the activity, the SMS. So let me show you before I leave this example another way of using this. If I click on the DDMS, I have two emulators out here, and I have a spinning wheel. Let's see. So something is spinning out here. I think it's this guy who's spinning. I may have a frozen emulator. The message will be discarded because it does not have a valid receipt. Okay, cancel. It's not this guy. I think this guy over here is might be hosed, so we'll just leave him alone actually. And I'll use a 5554. So I can come in here and I can click on this as emulator controller. And because I have two emulators that are going to show up in the device category over here. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so I can see. I have this one here who's hosed, and then I have this one up here. I think they're both actually going to be hosed momentarily. I have this spinning wheel. Not such a good sign. Well, this is my recording software that's going to be hosed. But something is slowly dying, a slow death here. I think it's this emulator actually. Let's see if I can kill this guy.
So how could you actually simulate calling an actual text on an actual phone?
Oh, I can do it right now. I'm gonna show. That's what I'm trying to show you.
Okay.
But I'm a little bit disabled right here. You click on the emulator that you want, and you come over here, and you put the incoming. I can't click because I got this here. Let me resolve this issue first. It's because of this emulator that's broken. So hold on. I have the technology. If I can get in there. Trying to get into the window to kill the emulator because this isn't going to kill it. It's this guy, so I'm going to force quit him. Okay, so I force quit him and I'm back. So I still have my one emulator running.
So how do you get to the DDMS?
So you get to the DDMS. Let me repeat those steps actually. Up in the right hand corner, you can also change the perspective. You should have buttons up here. If not, they're going to be in like a drop down list. You click on the DDMS. I only have one emulator running right now. If I click on that one emulator, now that my mouse is actually back, you click on the emulator that you want. This is the one you're going to be talking to. Incoming number 555-1212. No, let's see, that doesn't work. Incoming number 5554. And I'm going to send an SMS message. I'm going to say, hello from the DMS. This is Barb. And I'm going to click on send. And so up here it says, hello from the DDMS, this is Barb. So I can send from here. So if you don't have two emulators running, you can't get two emulators to run. You can use the DDMS to simulate that. I can also do voice here. Let's call. Hello? Oh, here it is, incoming call. So I don't know if I can answer this. Hello? Hello? Anybody there? Hello? No, I've not lost it. No, I'm talking to my computer. No. All right, hang up. Well, let's see if we can mute it. No speaker? Hello? 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 Hey, it does work. Hello? It sounds like an echo, but... Alright, so that's a hold. Hold, unhold. Alright, my call lane. How do I stop this call? Hang up, end. Okay, good. Alright, so if you wrote an app that was intercepting that, or if you wrote an app that's intercepting your text messages, yada yada, it will allow you to intercept that and actually do something with it, like play something back or whatever your app is intended to do. You work with that as well. You can also work with the GPS to change your location. So you have your longitude and your latitude. We haven't worked at maps yet. We're going to be doing that soon. Maps are a little bit more complicated to work with, but you can change your longitude and latitude, your location on Earth, and tell the emulator that you've moved to another location. All right, so I'm going to switch it back to the Java. And now I'm going to take a look at SMS examples, the second one, and open up the source code file. And this one has a send SMS activity on here. So here's the Android layout file with text boxes, phone number, messages itself, and a button that's going to send the SMS message for you. So in here, I have nothing more than the 3 components. I have the send button, the phone button, and the text button. And this should look very familiar to you. I'm setting the context view to the layout main, and I'm capturing those 3 components. And again, we're looking pretty small here, except for down here. This is where it's different. So we're creating a new instance of SMS Manager. So if we compare that with the includes up here, we have the telephony SMS Manager. In the last project we looked at, if we compare the two, we don't have that. We have content intent for the content providers. We're running the content provider, the SMS messenger. We're using an intent. We use the intent to go and call up the messenger, the SMS content provider that gave us the SMS capabilities that we were just looking at. All that SMS stuff came from the phone itself. In contrast, this one's using the telephony service, the SMS Manager. So it's still using, we're not going to use an intent with this. Instead, what we're going to do is here create an instance of SMS Manager that's going to be the default, get default SMS Manager, whoever is my default provider, and then send a text with the phone number and the text that we're going to send. So we're going to have our app look like it's doing everything, except for it's not physically sending the message, our provider's sending the message. We get the provider by the SMS Manager, which is the default SMS program. So if the user changes that program, it'll use that program. And it ends up in the outbox or in the history of that user's phone in terms of their saved messages. But it's your app that used it, and it never saw anything having to do with that service, but it's using the service. Same thing with the telephone. You can do the same thing. You want to dial? Here, press it. Dial. And you have your own dialing interface and your own dialing thing, but it's using the dialer on the phone. Because you can't create another dialer. You can't create another SMS service. It has to use the service that's there. So, I mean, you can create another SMS program, and I'll show you one in a few minutes. So I had another student do a project for me one time. It was actually kind of cool. You know how, like, you're busy, you're on the road, you know, and sometimes, you know, it's really hard to send a text message, especially while you're driving. You're not supposed to be. You're supposed to pull over, send your text messages. Well, he came out with this little box. This is, I'm on my way, running late, be there in 5, you know, miss you, love you, all these little messages, right? And you just click on it, it sends it for you automatically. Have the program, the numbers in there. So, you know, you go, okay, this goes to, you know, this goes to that person, this goes to that person. Hopefully you send the right message to the right person, you know, and you press the buttons and, you know, and it's an app, essentially, without having to write the text message out and do all that text message stuff. You just press buttons and it just sends stuff out. So, and then another guy actually did one step better than that. He put it on a timer. So you set the timers, so every day at a certain time, text message goes out. You know, how to show someone you really care. Alright.
That's pretty funny.
So, anyway, so people come up with the most creative ideas, actually. Alright, this one's going to send up a text message. Excuse me, it's getting loud in here. It's going to send up a toast message, and the toast message is going to show that the message was sent. Alright, so let's see what this one looks like. So I'm going to run the SMS demo. And the timers, actually I have an alarm clock example. So you could take the timer, if you wanted to do this yourself, you could take the timer off the alarm clock and run it. Let's see. Let's see what happened here. Oh, because I ran the wrong one. Ran the demo. don't want to run the demo, I want to run the SMS examples. I'm like, why did I get the other one? I can see the status. Here it is. All right. So now the entire interface is inside of the app because we're not doing an intent. We're not touching that other program. We're just going to use the service, the SMS manager. So I'm going to type in. Oh, I don't have a. I could send one to myself. 554. 5554. 5554. I'm going to send it to myself. And the message is going to be, I'm running late. There we go. And I'm going to send the message, and it says SMS sent. And any moment, I should get a message to self. If I put this in here, I don't know if I can send it to self. Let's see. No? Okay. I might have to open up another emulator. Well, let's just see. See how fast this 5556 loads up. I don't have more than one emulator loaded. So.
But you can't send this to an actual phone.
Actually, you can.
Okay.
You could take this app, install it on your phone, and put a real telephone number in there, and press send, and it'll send it.
It doesn't wait for the emulator to send it to the phone.
The emulator won't send it to a real phone because it doesn't have SMS service content. It's emulated, which is why the emulators can send to themselves and to the DDMS. But if you want to, you could actually come up with an entire list. This is what the guy did actually. You put take the other example we just did with the spinner. You put a bunch of names in there and a bunch of messages down below. You pick one of these, you pick one of these, and you press send. And then you have so this one here is 5556. So let's just change this one here to 5556. And then let's send it. It says message sent. Oh, look, up here it says I'm running late. So up here it says, oh, 2 unread messages. Probably one from earlier. Hate these emulators.
And just slide all the way to the bottom.
Here's the one from this emulator over here. So it does work actually on a real phone. So it's just using the service. You have to have SMS service on the phone. I had one person do this on a tablet. There's no service on the tablet. I mean, he didn't have service on his tablet, but put it on your Android phone if you're going to run this. And then now you have all these possibilities of all the things that you can do to tell people you care. Save people's lives while driving. So. All right, so that was just an example to show you how to do the SMS messaging. If you really want to know the theory behind it, go ahead and read through, and I'll give you all of the text in that PDF file I gave you. Questions on SMS messaging? Nope. Okay, good. So somebody said we were going to do the options menu. We already did the options menu one. So let's take a look at my queue. So let's see, we did SMS. Let me get rid of that one. We did the database. So AP events. Let's take a look at the events and event-driven behavior, because this one actually goes along with, let me show you where to find this one as well. This goes along with the button activity I've been talking about. All right, so if you go into, this one is going to be in tutorials. This one will be in the tutorials section. And in the tutorials section, you're going to see something towards the bottom. I think here it is here. Events, lecture tutorial, and event solution. So the event solution, let me load this up so we can sort of see what we're looking at, is going to demo everything I'm going to give you. We're not going to build this one. We're just going to, we're going to see it work. Oops. Hold on one second. So AP Events has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different examples in it. Each one of the examples, an example, here's events number 1, has one project in it. So I opened up example number 1. We'll take a look at that one real quick here. So file import, complete project. It's on my desktop, and it's in AP Events, and it's Events 1. So I'm going to finish. And I still have the built-in emulator running, so I'll just go ahead and run it in that. And this is going to be the color setter, so let me run this one here so you can see what I'm looking at. Probably could get rid of this other emulator though. This is 5556, don't need him anymore. 5554 has it running. So what do we see in here? I see 1, 2, 3 buttons. So I have a red button, a blue button, and a yellow button. And then I have 3 radio buttons, a red one, a blue one, and a yellow one. So what this project is doing, it's all about events. So it's showing you button presses versus radio button presses. It correlates with the examples that are going to be mentioned here. So let me start in, and I'll just, because this is a slightly different tutorial style, which is why I thought I'd orient you to this. 6 different sections, 3 different types of event listeners. So we're going to use a separate event listener class. You can use a named inner class. So you could take the event, take it, separate it out, make it into a separate class. This is the listener I'm talking about. Or it can be a named inner class, or it can be an anonymous inner class. We just saw an anonymous inner class today, actually, because we didn't actually have, we created a class, but we put it inside of another class, and it was actually rigged towards the event listener button. So it was, with the method call, we actually created the class actually for it. So we're going to use the main activity and having it implement in a listener interface, which is another way of doing it. We can actually put the listener in an interface. Or we could use the main activity and specify a method in the layout XML file. In the XML file, that's the on-click button. So we got 3 classic ways, plus the interface, not so classic, plus the button, not so classic. That's 5 different, and we have 6 different examples. They're all different combinations of these things. There's one extra one that has a bunch of other stuff in it, using multiple ones together. Copying and renaming Eclipse Android projects, don't have to worry about that. So using a separate listener class. Let's take a look at that. So the goal here is to change the color of the text view. We just saw it, is the text view is down below, with a button or radio button when it's pressed. So different colors depending upon which one's pressed. We saw that. The approach is we're going to use an external class that implements a view OnClickListener. Import the Android view OnClickListener. Then it says implement the OnClickListener. Advantages of doing it this way. Well, we've separated out the behavior first of all. So you can pass arguments to change the behavior along with it. So you can use it with a little bit more functionality. We've separated out the behavior. We've made it more flexible this way. Separate class generates or promotes loosely coupled items. We create a separate class. We use that class with everything we want. Loosely coupled, not quite embedded inside of everything else. Just like the database stuff, if you create a separate class for it, it's also loosely coupled, which means it can work with a lot of things. It doesn't have to work with this one, and we can swap it out and use another class if we want with another technique. So the event handler can be applied to different controls. It can be changed independently of the rest of the app. It makes it more flexible. And most situations, behavior is tightly coupled with an app anyhow, so it doesn't really matter one way or the other. Disadvantages, if you want to call the code in the main activity, you need to reference it. Yeah, you actually have to pull it in from another app, from another class. And then the code in main activity must be public. Yes. So here's the app that we just saw live. And it has 3 buttons and 3 horizontal radio groups. Using a linear layout. I'm not going to go through this part here because, well, actually I should maybe. I was going to show it to you live, but this is probably easier to see. The Android orientation was set to vertical. I think it's vertical by default. It's a linear layout. We've seen layouts, so this is one after the other. So linear does come in handy for a lot of things. You could switch it on its side, and the linear one would go horizontal if you made it go both ways. If not, it's going to be linear. Another problem that you get with Android versus iOS, actually. Android doesn't auto-adjust. You have to tell it what method you're going to support. And then in the older versions of iOS, it worked that way as well. Now they made it so it's automatic in iOS. But they haven't made it automatic yet, to the best of my knowledge, in Android, but maybe they have. Who knows? But we have a horizontal layout for the radio buttons. Those are those 3 buttons that are underneath the radio buttons here. These are the 3 that are underneath the 3 buttons here, radio buttons. That's horizontal. These are linear, vertical. And a little text view. That's the one on the bottom that's getting the color applied to it. And then there's some strings with red, white, and blue. So we're going to use strings as the labels of the buttons. And then our MainActivity class, we have events 1 example that extends activity. And we're going to create a view, and the view is going to be my M color region, which is the text view that's below it. And then only create, so we're going to find the text view color region, and we're going to take the buttons, and then on the button clicks we're going to apply the listener. So here's the trick. So we're saying new color setter, color red, new color setter, color blue, new color setter, color yellow, blue, red, orange, all the different colors we want. Well, here it is, the code here. Color setter, when it runs, is a new instance of a class, and color setter implements the OnClickListener. So we separated out the OnClickListener, put it into a separate class, and now we're passing it arguments. When it takes the arguments, so if we look at the constructor for this, it takes the color region and then the activity. So when we call the set OnClickListener, we're saying new color setter, color red this, ourselves. And it's going to be the color red. So we can take and apply the color red to the region. So this, my region color, and MainActivity is going to be equal to the MainActivity. So we took, and this is the entire code actually. It's a very small code, not too much here. Mostly comments actually. But we took and we passed it and we put it into a separate object so that we could pass it parameters and apply generic. It's almost polymorphic if you think about it. So generic OnClickListener that's setting all the properties for us depending upon how we call it. And we're putting the OnClickListener on the instance and we're just saying new color setter. It's an object without a name, but it's an external object, color setter, excuse me. So just showing you how to separate it out into a separate class. Maybe you're not going to ever do this. Most people just put it on the button control. Actually, they're not going to do this. But you have the flexibility if you want to do it this way. Alright. You can read through this at your own pace. It's again like another textbook. I'm just highlighting it for you. Take it home, read it a little bit slower if you want to know the fine details of it. In terms of the event handler, we're putting this.MainActivity equals the MainActivity, puts the MainActivity as OnClick MainActivity, which means anything on that MainActivity, get the use this OnClickListener and set the region of the whatever color. So here we have the results in the emulator. I showed it to you live. Results on a physical phone. Why does it matter, actually? It's about the same. Alright, so that was separating out the functionality and putting it into a separate class. Now we can use a named inner class instead of an anonymous inner class for the event handler. So this one should be example number 2. And we changed the color. It's the same functionality as before. So the layout here has got 3 group buttons, text button, string. So what's the difference with this one? In terms of the main class continued, we're going to set the color on the OnClickListener. We're going to set region color to the region color. And we have color setter. So this is You look at the emulators right here. Let me just actually open it up here because it might be easier just to see it from a source code perspective. That's events number 1. I have it out here anyway, so let me make this window a little smaller so I can streamline this a little bit. Alright, so that one was number 1. Let's see on number 2. Number 3. Don't worry, this is all we're getting through today. We're like, wait a minute, she's got 5, 6 more examples here to go. No, you just have to see a couple of them and then you'll get it. So, all right. So now I don't have to go back to that. So number 2, I can probably just show you the examples, make it easier for you. Actually, let's just do it this way. I'll just load them all in. There we go. All right, number 2. So it's all in one. Number 1 had it separated out. We put it out, and we put it inside of a separate class of its own called color setter. In number 2, we put it in one class, and we have events to example extends activity. Same code it's actually all the same code. It's all the same interface as well. Where we're going to set the OnClickListener here, and then we have color setter here. Class color setter implements OnClickListener. Took the outside class and put it inside. That's all we did. It's the same code actually. You just cut and paste this outside class and put it inside. People don't like this approach because this class is hidden. It's an inner named class inside of this other class. So they always say, shouldn't the class belong in its own file? Yeah. So you don't have to make this one public anymore. This one could be private. The other one had to be public. Public and public. MainActivity had to be public because you have an outside class and another outside class, and they're both having to communicate with each other. Now we can make them private, and we can hide this one inside of the other one, and everything works the same way. It's the same functionality, the same program. Same everything, except for now it's private. So the other one was public. More protective. How much more protective do we need to be for a button? I don't know. Some people would argue and say we don't need to be that protective for a button event. But anyway, let's take a look at another approach, number 3. So that was event number 2. And event number 3, I bet it's going to be unnamed. So the other one actually had the class, private class, color setter, implements, OnClickListener. This one has our list of colors, and then we have an onCreate method, then we have a set region, and then we have a class randomizer. Inside the class randomizer, we have implements OnClickListener. And then we have this onClick event. With no separate, it's a class color randomizer. It's randomizing the colors for us, but then on the onClick event, it's going to set the regional color by the index color. It doesn't really have a name to it. It's a method, so we hid it inside. So let me just make sure here I'm not missing anything important out of here. It's the anonymous inner class. So the goal is the same. The approach would be applied towards a single control only. And the idea here is we didn't make a separate class out of it. We made a different class that did a different behavior to randomly select a color for us or something of that nature, or selected the color for us, and we put it inside. So it defines a class that's instantiated in one foul swoop. This is what we looked at earlier, actually, where it says color button dot set OnClickListener, and then create a new OnClickListener. So we actually have an object, we just don't have a name to the object. We don't have it in a separate class. So why you want to inherit a class from a class just to make an instance of that object? Well, you don't have to, actually. So in here we're not doing it, and we're setting the OnClickListener automatically. It's just not, it doesn't have a name to it. This one has a slightly different interface. If you look at it, it does a random color for you. So it does do a random color. So And item number 3 handles events by having the main activity implement the listener interface. So if I look at number 3, so this one here, just like the other ones, extends activity. And we put the OnClickListener inside either anonymously or named, or we put it outside. So number 4, excuse me, this is number 4 already, we should see an implements OnClickListener up here. And we don't. We see the wrong example. Well, so let's see, wait a minute, is it number 3? Let's take a look at number 5. The example order might be messed up. All right, let me go back to number 4 then. There we go. Let's take a look where the interface is going to be implemented. Let's take a look here. See what number I'm on. If we implement the interface, it should look like this. This is number 5. Okay, so extends activity, implements OnClickListener, which is what I'm looking for. So let's see, this number 5 is supposed to have that. And I'm in number 4. So number 5, let me close this window here. This is what I wanted to see here. So implements the OnClickListener interface. Doesn't extend, but we're going to implement this, so we're going to have an OnClick method. Because the OnClickListener interface has OnClick. So down here on the bottom we have an OnCreate, and we should have, here's our OnClick. Override it from the interface. Same thing as before, but we're not creating a class at all. Instead we're implementing the interface. So using it as an interface. Alright, so what was number 4? I don't know. Same example as before. Handling event with the event handler method in main.xml file. Well, that's the one I showed you the other day. That's putting the OnClick. So when the user actually clicks on the button itself, and this would be number 6, I believe. Let's just take a look here. I'm down to 5. I don't know if I hit 4 or not. Number 6 has got nothing in here, except for there should be a method here. It's called randomize color. And then on the resource file, in the layout, we see the OnClick event to give us our randomized color. So people will look at this and go, well, how come we just shouldn't do it all this way? Tedious. If each one of your buttons is going to have the same thing happen to it, kind of tedious. Plus, this is just one way of doing it. So, you know, what if you wanted to send information to this method? You can't. You can't send parameters to this method. You can just call the method from an event. If you have an external class, going back to the number 1 example, we can reuse that in any example we want. We can just take and copy and move that example into each one of our classes. If we don't want to, we have to make it public though. If we don't want to make it public, we want to keep it private, then we just put it inside of the class. We don't want to actually go through the work of making it a separate class, we just make it anonymous, we just stick it in there. So it's many different ways of accomplishing an OnClick event, actually. So the rest of the lecture goes through a lot more examples that I kind of skipped through. I believe this is the end of it though, randomized color, yeah. So it'll show us, so that the actual example switches from the 3 buttons and the 3 radios to the 1 button, but it still has the same thing. It pretty much is doing the same thing, except for this one's doing random colors that it'll select from a menu. Because we can't pass a parameter with this. We could pass a parameter back up when we were actually using the separate class. That's the benefit of that separate class. We can actually make an instance of it, call the constructor with a different color. Now we can't necessarily do that, so we have to rely upon the functionality to do something for us. So, all right, I promised I'd let you out a little bit earlier. It is, at least it's only 4:30. It's pretty good. 4:24, 6 minutes earlier than I think we're supposed to get out or so. We're done for today. We are all caught up. Congratulations, we're up now from the day I took off. A couple of long classes made up all that work. But I did kind of go through this on the quick side, so I highly recommend reading through these PowerPoints or these PDF files a lot slower, and you'll get a lot more information out of that.
I'll just
So,
take this.
what are we taking? Okay, very good. All right, so unless we have any questions, comments, or concerns, we are done for today. Okay, so I'll see you next week with more exciting stuff to do. Maybe we'll build something fun next week instead of the theory. I had to give you a lot of theory today.